Hello, I'm Jeff Colton, and this is presentation 3 for Accounting 6650. For this presentation, I've chosen to cover a whistleblower named Harry Markopolos. Harry Markopolos attempted to uh, blow the whistle on Bernie Madoff. I thought this was an interesting case because it was very different from the others that were presented. I said attempted because he didn't actually blow the whistle on Bernie Madoff. Bernie Madoff eventually turned himself in, but he had uncovered Bernie Madoff as a fraud years before anyone else. I mean, even though many people maybe thought he was, he had found some pretty hard evidence for it. Back in 2000, Markopolos was commissioned or asked by his bosses at an investment firm to see if he could find out what it was that Bernie Madoff was doing that was getting such high returns. Markopolos said that within a few hours he could tell that this was a fraud. There were too many red flags, and he initially sent a memo or some materials to the SEC to suggest that they, look into Bernie Madoff's investing activities. Between 2000 and 2008, he sent 5 different memos to the SEC suggesting that they look further into these investigations. However, the SEC basically disregarded his claims, maybe looked into Bernie Madoff a few times, but never with any real intent, it seems. And so, basically this scheme went on 10 years longer than it should have, costing millions, if not billions of dollars to defrauded investors. Regarding the IMA statement on resolution of ethical conflict, these don't really apply in this case to the same extent as some of the others, because obviously Markopolos did not work for Madoff, so it wasn't the same situation as some of the others. However, he's still basically, even though he didn't maybe follow those same proper channels or couldn't have followed those same channels, the eventual resolution in any of these cases, if there is a clear violation of the law, is to reach outside one's organization and eventually go to a legal entity, which is what Markopolos did by reaching out to the SEC. Did he follow Badaracco's advice? When we look at that article, We Don't Need Another Hero by Badaracco, it's a bit difficult to say exactly that Markopolos followed those 4 points that Badaracco had. However, I do think that he was a quiet moral leader in his own sense. He was working tirelessly behind the scenes to try and uncover or expose Bernie Madoff as the fraud that he was. He had no or very little thought for reward. He did admit in his interview with Steve Croft for 60 Minutes that he maybe hoped to get some compensation if the scheme was front running, which is just another illegal activity. But he felt pretty sure it was a Ponzi scheme. So even with that in mind, he continued to push the SEC to try and investigate Madoff. And so, Badaracco does mention that oftentimes these quiet leaders have somewhat mixed motives, and sometimes interests are self-serving, but that doesn't necessarily make them any more moral or ethical for doing what they do. I think that Markopolos did a great job of at least trying. I mean, it's kind of, again, it's an interesting case because he didn't actually bring him down. Bernie Madoff eventually just turned himself in, but he was a good example of showing how if you basically that it's worth it to try and continue and try and stop someone from doing something unethical, no matter what the consequences are eventually. And in the end, he may not have succeeded in bringing Madoff down, but at least he could say, "I told you so."